Welcome back to Rpgibberish, the podcast by RPG lovers for RPG lovers. I'm your host, Greg, otherwise known as RPG Swagman, and of course, with me is my partner in crime, Aerodynamic Mike. How you going?
Welcome back. I'm glad to be back for the third episode and looking forward to this upcoming episode.
And tonight we are joined with a very special guest, our very good friend, Shintai. How you going, Shintai?
Hey guys, what's up? Thanks for having me.
The pleasure's all ours, good sir. Shintai does a lot of great reviews, and I did a video with him a while back, and it was a really good piece that can be found on many, many channels. But Shintai, tell us about your channel.
Well, my channel is Shintai123 on YouTube, and I mainly talk about video games, obviously. but more specifically, I like to talk about RPGs, because honestly, that's my favorite genre. Sometimes I'll delve into like action games as well, because I also really enjoy action games like Devil May Cry. But my love for RPGs runs deep. I've been playing them for a long time. So, of course, when I made this channel, the main thing I wanted to talk about were some really great RPGs, both new and old, because if I don't talk about these games, who will?
Exactly. I found Shintai a long time ago when I started YouTube. Basically anyone that did any reviews on RPGs, I quickly found them out, and I always enjoy his reviews, and he talks about a lot of great RPGs. So, good RPG fans, tonight the reason we've brought on Shintai is because for the third episode of Rpgibberish, we're going to be talking about Gust's Atelier series. And fortunate for us, Shintai is an Atelier expert, and of course Gust is his favorite company.
Yep.
Doesn't get any better than that. Now, seriously, he did a really good video ages ago where he talked about Gust's favorite company. Yeah, definitely check out that video. Shintai, if you could tell the viewers where they can reach your channel.
Yeah, definitely. Just go to youtube.com/user/Shintai123. You can find all my videos there. And the video that Greg is talking about is a slightly older one, so you have to scroll down a bit. But yeah, I basically just talk about Gust and why they're my favorite company, or at least one of my favorite, video game developers.
Yeah, I'm actually, I wouldn't say a huge fan of the Atelier series, but I've played a lot of them, so I can add a bit of knowledge to this episode, and so has Aero. He's played a few.
Yes, I've played a few, not all of them, but I'm very psyched, to hear the expertise, of Shintai, who has played many more.
Many, many more.
Well, there's been so many Gust games and so many sub-series that we're have to reserving this one just to Atelier, because there's a bunch.
Yeah, we won't be covering Artenelico. That'll be another episode down the track, definitely.
Yes. Alright. So, I'm interested, I've only played one of the sub-games, but how, is the Atelier games? What sets it apart from all the other games?
In my opinion, what makes the Atelier series kind of different is that there's a lot of emphasis on alchemy. Now, this is something that's apparent for most games made by Gust. I'd say less so in the Artenelico series. The Artenelico series doesn't really focus on the alchemy too much. There's a little bit of item creation, but it's kind of like a footnote. But especially in Artenelico and in Khemia, which is all in the same continuity, the alchemy is a big part of the game. Now, this can shy away some gamers. Some of them will see that and are like, I don't really like that. And I can understand that. But I really enjoy it because it makes the game different. A lot of games focus on different things. And with the Atelier series, I find it really interesting that something that's usually kind of like a side thing, something that usually, game developers kind of throw in to spice up the game a little bit. This is something that this series decided to focus on. I really enjoy improving this alchemy system where you can put items together and create something else. You can get different elements. You can go around the world. You can get like fire, water, wood elements, all these different things, and you can make items you've already previously created on the go. There's a lot of depth to it, and I think that's what really makes this series kind of stand out compared to other RPG series, in my opinion.
Yeah, the synthesizing in Atelier is what drew me to it. It's definitely much more in-depth, more than any other RPG I've ever encountered. Most of the Atelier games I play, I make sure to make every possible item I can with the resources around me before I progress more into the game's story. And I've just really had fun spending hours just getting as many items I can create, seeing any little hidden story arcs, which I'll probably talk about more. That comes apparent into like games like Atelier Iris, but basically there's a lot more than just the synthesizing. I always link Atelier more to I hear a lot about more anime fans drawn to Atelier more than any other RPG because there's just of the art design. It's very colorful. It's very vibrant. And I know the series has gone through a lot of transitions with their artwork, but it's one of the things that stands out, to me. And one of the games I have not played yet is Khemia, but from what I've seen of the artwork, it is very nice. And it's one of the reasons that I really want to play that game because I really like the look of the characters and how vibrant they look. But definitely, and one thing I've got to mention that I find very quirky with these games, and I don't know if any of our listeners might know the answer to this, all I have to say is barrel. For all of you that don't understand that, and I don't understand it quite myself, apparently in some of the Atelier games, if you go up to a barrel, the character will very enthusiastically scream barrel out. Like, it's like they haven't seen in a while. It's, the one thing they've always wanted. I'm just like, there's got to be an inside joke that I don't know too about. I think the joke is not telling everyone what it is. So you leave it up to your imagination.
What's kind of funny is in Khemia 2, you can't do that. There are no barrels in the game. So they kind of took that feature out. But there is one barrel that you can find in the school that the main characters attend to. There's one barrel and it's kind of stashed away somewhere, and when you approach it, the main character will yell barrel, and then one of the other characters will be like, "What are you doing?" And then the guy will be like, "I don't know. I just felt that I had to say that."
But yes, it's a very great episode we've got planned talking about Atelier, and we've definitely got the right person to help us along. Aero, would you like to talk about the history of Atelier and Gust?
Alright, sure, I'll talk a little bit about the history of the Atelier series. Now, like we have brought on Shintai, I am by no means an expert. That's definitely why we brought on Shintai, of course, but recently I picked up a fantastic localized art book called the Atelier Series Official Chronicle. It was localized by Udon Entertainment, and it is a fantastic art book of all the Atelier games, but luckily for us it also gives a quick rundown and some history behind all the games in the series, all the way up to Atelier Rorona, because this book was brought out in Japan a couple of years ago, so Totori and Marero were not in the bigs. For anyone interested, this recently released Atelier Series Official Chronicle, so be sure to check it out. In any case, let's take a look at the history of the Atelier series. The first game was Atelier Marie, released in 1997, and it starred our blonde-haired heroine Marie as she moved to Salburg, and the first couple of games are part of the so-called Salburg trilogy, which I feel is derived from the Austrian Salzburg, which is a city in Austria. So the game was released in 1997 and had those staple alchemist type of gameplay. Marie moved to Salburg hoping to become a famous alchemist, but of course some stuff happened, and I figured out that her final exam she failed on it, so after that the story takes off, and that's pretty much the first game. It was later ported as well as an updated 1.5 version to both the Saturn and the PC about a year later, and it did pretty well for Gust. It was the first Atelier game. It was definitely a cult hit as well as in Japan, and that was definitely a great start, you know, for the Atelier series. So you basically play as Marie, who is also called Merlone, and there's a huge set of characters, you know, very different from traditional JRPGs. But what I like most about the Atelier series is that it's a very European style of characters. A lot of characters are called, you know, German type names, French type names, you know, stuff like Sterkenburg and Salburg and stuff like that. And that's definitely very interesting, and takes its you know, similarities from an anime series called Full Metal Alchemist. Anyways, let's talk a little bit more about the history. The second game was Atelier Ellie, which is the second game in the Alchemist of Salburg series. It was released a year later, again on the PlayStation in 1998, and was also ported to the PC. And this time you play as Elfir Traum, just short for Ellie, and again she is on, you know, the quest to become an alchemist. One interesting thing though is that her life was saved by Atelier, or at least Marie Merlone from the last game, and that's why she wants to set out on a quest to become an alchemist herself. Again, a pretty great game from the Atelier series, wonderful illustrations as well, and rounds out the second part of the Salburg trilogy. And there are some recurring characters like Marie from the first game in the second game. Now the final game in the Salburg trilogy is Atelier Lily, and Atelier Lily is the, like I said, the third game on the Salburg series, but it's not released on the Sony Playstation. It has been released on the PlayStation 2. Again, the illustrations are done again by the wonderful Isaimon Yamagata, and the game was released in 2001. Now the game basically takes the player back through time to actually have a hand in building the Salburg Academy, where the previous titles took place, so this is more a prequel. And this time you play as Lily, and Lily taught herself everything she knows about alchemy, and her passion impressed the authorities of Cantonis, which in the games is the academic city. And you basically go about, again, time management, you know, over a course of a couple of years, and you found, you know, the alchemy school that was the main part of the first two games, and that basically rounds out the Salburg series. Like I said, it's a prequel, so you don't see a lot of recurring characters, but you do see the ancestors. Now after that we're moving on to a second series, and that is the Alchemist of Gramnad. Now the Alchemist of Gramnad series has two games which were also subsequently ported to the PlayStation Portable. The first game is Atelier Judy, and Atelier Judy was released a year later again on the PlayStation 2, and has you know, is starring Judith Voltone, short for Judy, and it's basically a series that takes place 200 years before the Salburg series, and again it takes place in the region of Gramnad. And again, this game was never released, you know, in Japanese, so information is scarce of what we can find, and none of these Japanese games have been fan translated, sadly. But it's still a very interesting game. The game looks absolutely gorgeous. They have a new, you know, character. Pamela makes an appearance once again, and they have Fairy back. And overall, it's a great second game for the PlayStation 2. And the second game in the Gramnad series, so the Alchemist of Gramnad 2, is called Atelier Violet. And this time you play as Violet Plantane, and again her story takes place in Gramnad. And the game takes specifically place in Knarland, which is located, you know, in the south of Gramnad. And again, it's pretty similar. You know, one of the characters from Atelier, Ellie, Isel, she's the one who taught Violet about, you know, alchemy and such. The game was released in 2003, again on the PlayStation 2, and marks pretty much the final game never to be released in English. So after this, you know, it's about time that we are finally going to be moving on to the wonderful Atelier series, you know, the first games that were released by NIS. And I believe, you know, that we brought on an expert, so please, Shintai, tell us everything you know about the wonderful Atelier Iris games.
Well, the Atelier Iris series is mainly 3 games on the PS2. There's Atelier Iris Eternal Mana, Atelier Iris 2, the Azov Destiny, and Atelier Iris 3, the Grand Phantasm. And the first Atelier Iris, Eternal Mana, that's my introduction to Gust and the Atelier Iris series in general. And in my opinion, while it is a bit flawed, it's still a really good game. What I mean by flawed is, unfortunately, hasn't aged very well in certain areas. One thing I didn't like was when you level up, your stats go up randomly. So there's a small chance that when you level up, your characters won't get any stats up, which that was always annoying. That reminded me of Fire Emblem, and I was like, ah, no. But looking past that, the first Atelier Iris was a really good game. Now, I want to get into a little bit why this series is called Atelier Iris. As Arrow was talking about before, there's Garland and Granad. I mean not Garland. Salburg and Gramnad, which are the actual worlds. But Iris, the reason it's called Iris is because there's a character named Iris Blanchimont, and that's where the name comes from. She's kind of like the heroine of the series, so to speak. Even though you rarely see her and you don't really play as her, she's very influential to the entire series, and she's a very important character, which I thought was really cool. And she's just an interesting character in general because of how little information there is. But the first game, Atelier Iris, is mainly about the main character named Klein Kaisling. And he's just this young alchemist, and he's just traveling the world. And he finds this girl who's named Lita Blanchimont, who is this girl that has like these claws on her, on her hands, and not literal claws. It's an equipment. And if you notice, she has the same last name as Iris, which is Blanchimont, which that's a big spoiler. I'm not going to get into that. But what's really good about this game is I really liked the characters in general. Like, Klein and Lita have this kind of back and forth love-hate kind of relationship. Now, that's usually kind of cliche and corny, but the way it was done in this game, I really liked. It was really funny. You genuinely liked these characters, and it was fun to, see them interact with each other. And overall, the first Atelier Iris, I think, was a really solid game. I think you could find it fairly inexpensive nowadays, and I definitely recommend picking it up. But Greg, unfortunately, had some misfortune with this game that I didn't, so I'm going to let him talk about that for a bit.
Before we can get into that misfortune, I actually got into the Atelier series with Iris, but I actually knew about the series a while back ago when I got my first computer, and it was the family's first computer. And the first thing I wanted to know is about other PS2 RPGs, because that was back in the days where I got the PS2, I think, a year after its release with Dark Cloud, and I just wanted to know if there was any other RPGs that was ever released over the world. And I found out about Atelier Duty, and it actually looked like quite a good game, so that kind of introduced me to Atelier, but of course I never had any access to play it. So it wasn't until Iris that I got to finally play the series, and I found it for reasonably cheap at my local game store. So I popped it in, and the first thing that kind of came to my mind is it feels like a PlayStation 1 RPG with PS2 graphics, sort of like the high-res 2D visuals. And I'm an old hat at RPG, so I liked how old school the game was. But the one thing that interested me more than anything was the alchemy system, which played a big part in games like Dragon Quest VIII, but while it was awesome in Dragon Quest VIII, it was kind of more fleshed out and more focused in the Atelier series, where they made more of a point, more than any other RPGs that I've ever played. So when it came to playing Atelier Iris, I found myself basically making every possible item before continuing the storyline, like I've said before. And that's how I played it. But one of the cool features of Atelier Iris is some of the storekeepers, or one in general, actually has, I would like to say, an optional story where when you make a certain item, there'd be a cutscene, pushing that part of the story forward. And I like that as a little extra. And I always want to know what would happen. One of the cool things is Atelier Iris has a really good party. I mean, I like Klein as a main character and leader, but one of my favorite characters is a character called Delsis, which is probably the oldest character of the team, and he's a bit of a drunk, and he's got a lot of comedy value, and his relationship between the others, especially leader, there's a lot of tension. He's voiced by my favorite voice actor, which is Crispin Freeman, and does the role a lot of justice, and I really liked his dialogue in question. So, all in all, now, getting to what Shintai said. Now, unfortunately, I did not finish Atelier Iris. However, that was beyond my control because my copy of Atelier Iris had a game-breaking glitch where one of the events did not register and did not happen. Thus, I was pretty much stuck in limbo.
That's pretty bad.
And I remember back in the day blaming Gust for that, but as Shintai pointed it out, it wasn't Gust's fault, and I'm going to give it over to Shintai to explain why that is.
Now, with Atelier Iris, personally, I have never encountered this, so it may be a PAL exclusive glitch, which if that's the case, that's really awful. But what happened is this was actually the fault of NIS America, who were the localization team behind it, and they've done this before.
They've done this many times before. We're going to get into it in the podcast and future episodes, but continue, good sir.
Yes, they've done this before, so unfortunately, we'll get in. Yeah, like Greg said, we'll get into that in a separate episode. But unfortunately, they've gotten a lot better nowadays. I have to say, like with the games that they've been releasing a lot more games recently, and they have put their shit together. They've gotten really good, and they haven't messed it up.
Oh, that's good.
Like they released Trinity Universe, they released Archimako Koga, they released Hyperdimension Neptunia, they released Atelier Rorona, and all these games that they've been releasing nowadays have been just fine, which I'm very grateful for that they've, taken this a little more seriously. And I think they realized that that they've been messing up a lot as well. So one thing that they did to try and make it up to the fans was if you order something from their online store, you have the option to pick free shipping, which I think was really awesome.
That's cool. At least they're trying to do something for the fans in compensation. Now, like I said, there's plenty of other instances, but I won't have time for that. So,
yeah.
Just finish up. I think Atelier Iris is a really great RPG. There's lots to do, and the synthesizing sort of takes away from the storyline. Just those great offbeat moments where you don't feel like going into the storyline. You just want to go off and relax and see what you can mix and match and create. And I had fun doing that.
Yeah, well, I think it's time to jump into Atelier Iris 2, which, in my opinion, was a lot of steps forward, but also a few steps back in a few ways. But overall, I really enjoyed Atelier Iris 2. And it's actually a prequel. It takes place many years before Atelier Iris 1. In fact, this isn't that much of a spoiler, but in Atelier Iris 1, Iris Blanchimont is already passed away. But in Atelier Iris 2, you see her as a little girl. She's like a little 7, 8-year-old little girl, which I thought was really cute. And the game is mostly about our protagonist, who is actually, because what was in the first game, the main character was mainly an alchemist, but this game is actually split with two protagonists. There's Felt Blanchimont and Vise Blanchimont. And Felt is a fighter. He knows how to use a little bit of alchemy, but he's really lazy. He doesn't want to bother with it. So most of the time he just practices with his sword. So he's a really good sword fighter. But Vise, she and Felt are childhood friends. She is the main alchemist. She's the one that's actually doing the dirty work, going in and actually, putting the items together. And it's really interesting because the way that the game works, it's separated by two worlds. Felt has to go into this other world that beyond the Belkide Gate that nobody's ever really been through before. And Vise is still on their own world, and she is making the alchemy items, and she's using like a certain magic in order to send the items to Felt so she can help him. So you're going back and forth between the two characters. You're mostly playing as Felt, though. But you're going back between Felt and Vise, and you are, exploring the world as Felt, doing turn-based combat, fighting enemies, and then you switch back to Vise, and then in that world, there's no combat. She's just going around, she's just getting more items so she can synthesize. And, she's talking to the people around the town and getting more acquainted with them and sometimes getting something out of it. And there are also like parts of the world that are kind of cut off that you need to get further into the game before you can go into that area, and then it unlocks something else that you can do. Like the different manas. There's like the fire mana, there's the water mana, the wind mana. There's all these different manas, and they will allow Vise to synthesize even more items, which in turn she can send to Felt, and he will be able to survive better. And overall, I felt that Atelier Iris 2, the story wasn't as good as the first game, in my opinion. Not to say that it was bad, because I really liked the story, but I didn't felt that the characters were quite as developed in 2 as they were in 1. I felt that in 1, there's a lot of interaction and a lot of development between the characters. And not as much in 2, but it was still good. And I also felt that everything was much smoother and much more solid in a technical aspect in the second game. The graphics are sharper. That problem I was discussing before, where when you would level up and its stats would go up randomly, that's eliminated. And they even added this extra system where when you equip certain items, and I mean not items, when you create certain weapons, you can learn different moves, and you earn these skill points, and you use these skill points with the skill that's attached to a certain weapon, and then you'll be able to keep that skill instead of that only being able to use it when you have that weapon equipped. It's a little bit like Final Fantasy IX.
There's a lot of RPGs. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a lot of RPGs that use that system. It's actually one of my favorites. It makes item finding and just that bit more enticing, that you want to get every piece of equipment, weaponry, so you can learn everything. And I could mention all the RPGs that utilizes that system, but we'll be here for hours on end. But I just want to touch upon Camelot likes to use that system a lot, but it's very involuntarily. You can't put points. You just have to use the weapons a lot, and it'll automatically learn the skill after a fair number of uses. That happens a lot in Shining. It happens in Shining Force 3, and it happens in the Golden Sun games, especially in Dark Dawn, where you learn the skills based off the weapons, and your character can permanently use them. So I always like games like that. It's a shame that I actually never got to play Atelier Iris 2 that much. I think I popped it in for a couple of hours and got sidetracked and never got back to it. So I can't really say much on this subject, but I'll let Shintai continue.
I don't really have much else to say about Atelier Iris 2. It's a really solid game. Similar to Atelier Iris 1, you can find it pretty inexpensive nowadays, since these are fairly older PS2 games. They've dropped down in price, and they're certainly worth checking out because they're just really solid RPGs, and they do things a little differently than most, but at the same time feel nostalgic because, like Greg said before, they look like PS1 games as if they were kind of put in a higher resolution and kind of graphics were smoothed out a little bit, which I always really like that art, that kind of look for a game. I always really enjoyed it. And the next game in the series is Atelier Iris 3, Grand Phantasm, which unfortunately I haven't had a chance to play. I know Greg has played it, so I'm going to let him talk about it.
Fortunately, on RPG fans, I've only played it for 1 hour, which isn't enough to give you a good analysis of the game. I want to get back to it at a later state, because what I've played of it, I've enjoyed it. I can tell you from what I've seen of the game, it's a bit more roguish than its usual game. It retains that high-res sort of art style that the series is famous for. It's how the characters dress that I find different, because usually Atelier Iris 1 gets put into the twee or cutesy sort of label, but it's not really the case in Atelier Iris 3. Most of the characters that you meet are very roguish. They're not wearing that much, very skimpy, just very roguish slash mercenary type, which actually fits into the whole scheme that your characters are mercenaries and they do perform these quests from this hub city and the guild. And from what I've seen of it, it looks as good as the Atelier Iris 1. The battle system I find interesting, especially for what Shintai told me. Could you just share your thoughts on Atelier Iris 3's battle system, what you've been told?
Well, what I've been told, that not just the battle system, but like the general structure of Atelier Iris 3 is very similar to the first one, Khemia. Some people have told me that Atelier Iris 3 is, in a lot of respects, a prototype for the first Mana Khemia, which I find pretty interesting, especially considering I really, really enjoy Mana Khemia. And we're going to segue into Mana Khemia as well. And Mana Khemia is basically a series that's still in the same universe as the Atelier Iris series, and still retains many of the same mechanics and elements that were found in the previous Atelier Iris games, but it's still its own different series, and it still plays like its own game series. Because primarily with Mana Khemia is alchemy is considered like this fine art of sorts, and there's actually there's a school for alchemy. You can go to this school to learn how to do alchemy, and that's essentially what Mana Khemia is all about. You are a student at this school, and a lot of people kind of make comparison from Mana Khemia to Persona 3 and Persona 4 because both games have to do with going to school. But the difference being is in Persona 3, the school element of the game and the combat and the story of the game are kind of separate from each other. While in Mana Khemia, your school assignment is to go to this area and fight some monsters. That's your school assignment. Depending on how well you do, you'll get a grade for it. If you you kick the crap out of those monsters, you get an A.
As I wish we had that in real life. Get some straight A's and beating down some fools.
And it's the way it works in this game is actually pretty ingenious, because if you do certain things right, if you do the mission quickly, or the assignment in this case, you do it quickly, you do it well, the game rewards you. You have more free time, which is true for real life. The better and faster you do your work, the more free time you have. And there's different days in the game, and every day is like its own block. And if you have a free day, this allows you to do other things. You can actually do sub quests for each character. You have all your different characters, and you can do their sub quests, and you get to learn a little more about them. And this also allows you to have like a character-specific ending with that character. But I think the thing that makes Mana Khemia really stand out is how fast-paced the combat system is. The combat system in Mana Khemia is awesome. You have characters jumping in, slashing enemies up, and then you can call a character from your back row, from like your reserves, to jump in and attack the enemy, and then that character will take the place of the character from before. It's great. There's a lot of complexity to the combat system. My only real complaint with the combat in the first Mana Khemia is that it takes a very long time before the combat fully opens up. I think it was around 30 hours into the game until the combat system was fully realized, and I could do all the different aspects of the combat that allowed me to, like the over limits and being able to switch characters back and forth from the front row and the back row. But the combat system is really fast-paced and really fun, and just an absolute blast, and easily one of the best battle systems I've seen in a while for an RPG, period, for turn-based RPG. And I know Arrow wanted to talk a bit about the first Mana Khemia as well, so leave.
Oh yes, definitely. Mana Khemia is one of the few games, pretty much the only game in the Atelier series that I've been able to play. I've been collecting the Gust games, for a very long time, but due to the fact that I don't own an NTSC PlayStation 2, I was only able to play my PAL copy of Mana Khemia. And I played it for a while last year, and I recently got back into it and finally finished the game. And in my opinion, it's indeed a very, very interesting RPG. The battle system is definitely the high point, in my opinion, of the game. It reminded me very much of Final Fantasy X, where you're able to swap in your characters from your reserves as well. But like you said, it's more fast-paced. You get a lot of turn bonuses, if you swap your characters in and out. And for my first experience with the Atelier series, I have to say, it's a very light-hearted RPG series. I really liked it. The school life, at times was of course interesting, but at times, I felt it was a little bit too light-hearted. And as a die-hard veteran from Shin Megami Tensei, for instance, I felt that the story was a little bit too easygoing. But overall, what I've played, it was a very charming, very unique looking RPG. I kind of like the environment, the isometric views and such. And for first experience, I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait, and hopefully at some point I will be able to check out the sequel, Mana Khemia 2, which, like you said earlier in the podcast, sadly never was released in the PAL regions. And hopefully check out, some of the newer games that we'll talk about in a second. But from what I've played, from Mana Khemia, it's an interesting RPG series. But you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Like Greg mentioned earlier, the synthesizing, alchemy part cannot be for everyone. And while I enjoyed it, it is definitely not something that I would want to do, 3 games in a row. And I have to size these games, for months apart, but it's an interesting game, an interesting gameplay series, and I'm interested, to see how the sequel improved, on the original. But like I said, I haven't played it. But Shintai, I believe you believe that's one of your favorite games from Gust, so tell us all about it.
Yeah, I believe that Khemia 2 pretty much took what was wrong in the first Khemia. Not that there was a lot wrong with it, but they, for the most part, fixed it, except for the lighthearted story, I guess. If you saw that as a fault, it's still very lighthearted, but it took some of the things that were wrong in the first game, improved it, and improved it in other areas. Yep. And the battle system in Khemia 2 was improved upon, which I thought was incredible, because I thought the battle system in the first one was already really good. One of the things that I noticed right away was it didn't take nearly as long as it did in Khemia 1 to see everything that the battle system had to offer. And I thought this was much better, because while I do understand kind of leaving certain aspects of the game for a later part, so when you get to it, it freshens up the experience more. But I felt that the first Khemia took way too long, and that this second game, it was just right. It didn't give it to you right at the beginning of the game, but it introduced it to you at the different elements at a nice steady pace, and you were able to understand everything as you went along fairly well. And the combat in this game is just significantly better. First of all, there's actually 2 campaigns, actually. The original game, you only played as Vayne, and in this game, you play as either Raze or Orica. I've beaten the game as Raze, and I've played a good chunk of the game as Orica. And what's interesting is that they have their own parties, and it's basically the same story for the most part, but they see it in different perspectives, and different things happen. And considering that it's 2 different parties, they also fight differently. So you have to use different strategies depending on which campaign you decide to play on. It also changes how you do alchemy, because one of the interesting things about Khemia is when you're doing the alchemy, you can actually have your teammates, because all of them are alchemists, they can help you out. They can make it so that if you're trying to use items that are mostly fire-based, this one character who is a fireman, he'll come in and be like, "Oh, I'll help you out," and all the items that have a fire element, it will be much easier for you to make a more refined version of that item. And if you're using the ice mana, same rules apply. But if you're playing with Orica, obviously it's a different team. It's different characters. So when she's synthesizing items, she has different bonuses because of the different characters. So instead of having the fire and ice mana that Raze does, she instead relies on the other characters. Like, she has her creepy friend, the one that always carries a book, and she's really into like dark magic and like all these different dark voodoo stuff. So she's really good when it comes to like mysterious items. And I think this adds a really nice layer of depth to the game. It really gets you motivated to want to play as both campaigns, because they are, fairly different. And going back again to the battle system, you have these 2 different parties with vastly different fighting styles. Even though it's still turn-based, it does feel like you're playing with, different characters. Like, Orica has this this kind of like crystal ball sort of thing that she can shoot out light magic from, while Reyes has this magical sword of light, and all the different party members have their own unique skills. And there's a certain aspect of the combat system where, depending on like how much of your gauge is filled, you can go into like a kind of like an over limit kind of mode where everyone's attack power goes up. And when you do the attack where somebody jumps from the back row, instead of just doing their normal attack, they'll do a completely different attack. And then you could do like co-op skills where the both of them will attack at the same time, and then the other one will jump in with an even more powerful attack. Different things like that. There's so much more complexity to the combat system, to an already complex combat system from the first game. It works really well. Even though there's more depth to it, it doesn't really feel intimidating. And overall, I felt that Khemia 2 was just leaps and bounds better than the first one. And I really enjoyed the first one, so that's saying a lot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've actually seen footage on Khemia 2 and Khemia. One of the cool things is, I think I talked about this with Shintai in a Skype call months ago, and he actually showed me some footage of Khemia 2's battle system, and he ain't kidding. There's a lot you can do in that battle system. There's a lot of combos and unite attacks, and I'm a big fan of unite attacks in RPGs. It just brings out more of the character, and of course is another option for you to choose in battle. But I've just always enjoyed those games where you can combine skills and all that, so it sounds really interesting. But unfortunately, Khemia 1, like basically we've just said, is a PAL game, but it's very rare. I'm very glad that Arrow was able to find a copy. Here in Australia, it's virtually non-existent. You never see a copy. And of course, 2 never came out in PAL, which is pretty sad. I know there was a PSP version of Khemia 2, but of course that didn't come outside of Japan, which is unfortunate. But for some odd reason, out of all of Gust's games, Khemia actually, I don't know, it excites me the most because of the character designs. I think are the best that the company's produced. I just think the character designs are very vibrant, very well done, and they just stick out more so than the other games they've done. And I've always been interested in Khemia. And the case is also awesome. I think Eric can tell me this. The case is actually on its side. Basically, you have to put the case on its side to actually see it upright. Is that true?
Yes. If you're talking about the standard edition, they basically have the logo of the game in a vertical position, unlike most games that is just, if you hold the case upright, you see the game, which is very unique. You don't see that often. However, I do have the limited edition, which basically has the characters on the front, which is also a nice case. But that's definitely very unique twist, to cover art of the first Khemia. But that's indeed correct.
Yeah. So just to give you pretty much just to let you know, and everywhere across the world. So, Shintai just mentioned how rare Khemia is to get in America.
If you want to get the special edition, forget about it. you'll probably have not a good chance, but you have a decent chance of getting the game on its own. But there were 2 different special editions, if I'm not mistaken. There was one that was available for like Amazon, and then there's the other special edition that you could get at GameStop. And the one I got was a standard one from GameStop. That one comes in a box with a poster and the soundtrack, and it's a fairly nice little special edition. I really like the poster, actually. And one of these days I want to get it framed, because I want to get all the posters I have framed one of these days, because they're really nice, very well drawn. I agree with what Greg said before. The art for the series is very well done. It's very colorful, very bright, very nice looking. But yeah, in general, I would say that you might have a little bit harder of a time finding games kind of released by NIS America in general, along with Atlus. I would say those two companies in general, you'll have a harder time finding their games as opposed to other companies. But if you dig deep enough, you look around, you know, you'll eventually find them, and maybe you'll find them at a good price. But yeah, unfortunately, these games aren't as easy to come by as your other, you know, more well-known series, which is definitely a shame because these games really deserve to be played by more people, in my opinion.
One thing I kind of want to mention before we segue into the next big series in the Atelier franchise is just to give a quick bit of knowledge for the PAL region, is the Atelier games were actually published by Koei, of all people. Back in those days, NIS America and Gust relied on Koei for the Atelier games. And it was around that time where Koei was also bringing out some Atlus games as well. So it was very nice that Shintai also talked about Atlus, because one of the things that I basically, when I was playing games around the 2005 era, is there's a lot of basically outcry for Dynasty Warriors games. It's very popular. So a lot of people that love Koei would always look at the label of the Atelier games and buy it and always associate them with Koei. But Koei Europe only produced them, didn't create them. That was Gust that created the games. It was very interesting that Koei took the chance to bring them out to the PAL region. And they were kind of this RPG sort of distributor for a while. Kind of took some load off Ghostlight when it came to most of the Shin Megami Tensei games, but Ghostlight's kind of made a comeback of sorts. It wasn't until Aero told me that Ghostlight still was basically distributing games, so just thought I'd mention that. For the next part of the Atelier series we're going to talk about is probably one that a lot of PS3 owners have the chance to play, and of course that is Atelier Rorona. Shintai, would you do the honors?
Gladly. Atelier Rorona is the first part of the Garland series, which is basically about this girl. Her name is Rorona, and she, unfortunately, is the assistant of this really lazy alchemist. And nobody in town really likes her. Nobody really trusts this.
I don't like her. I've only played the game for 3 hours and I don't like her.
Nobody in town likes her either, so you're part of the consensus. But Atelier herself is a really nice girl. She's very earnest and kind of naive. And what ends up happening is this lazy girl or woman or whatever decides to give the alchemy shop to her instead. She makes it sound like she's doing it because she wants to see her grow up and blah, blah, blah. But she probably just did it because she's lazy and didn't want to bother with it anymore.
Yep. Oh, dear.
But what ends up happening is the castle, the kingdom, they send a knight over, and he basically tells them that they're going to close this place down if they don't do these assignments and they don't produce more revenue, because they're, as of now, are just kind of there and they're not really doing much. Nobody really likes the place. Nobody really goes there. So the point of the game is basically you play as Rorona and you have a limited amount of time. It's not really based on time, though. It's more like Persona 3, where you can run around the room indefinitely. That doesn't matter. Depending on what you do, there are certain things that'll cost certain amount of hours or even a full day, and you need to fulfill the conditions of these certain assignments that are given to you. Some of them are simple, some of them are complex, and the game also has turn-based battle system, which is actually very simple. It's very basic. There's really not a whole lot to it, but I think that's mostly because the game focuses more on this time management system that they've got going for it, and of course the familiar alchemy system. And I haven't played the game too much. I did play a nice chunk of it, and the reason is because the game is a little intimidating with basically the not really the time limit, so to speak, but this aspect of the game where you only have a certain number of days, and that can be kind of intimidating for some gamers. And I would think that most people need to get in the right mindset before they jump into something like that.
Yeah.
But the game has already spawned 2 sequels, Atelier Maru and Atelier Totori, which I believe NIS America is also going to be bringing out in glorious special editions, like they did with Atelier Rorona, which I also did get the box set for Atelier Rorona. If you're curious what that has, there's plenty of videos of people unboxing it, but to give you a quick rundown, it's basically the game, obviously, in this big box. And the reason the box is so big is because it comes with an art book. And the art book is hardcover, comes with these great concept arts of the characters, a little bit of author's notes here and there. Very nice art book. And what's great about NIS America and Atlas in general, which I probably should have mentioned before, is most of their special editions, unless you're getting like this, one of the premium ones, like Disgaea 4, most of them are at a $60 price. They're at or however it is in other countries. It is the normal price that you would buy for a game, but it comes with more stuff. And that's something I've always appreciated from Atlas, and I've always appreciated from NIS America. And it looks like with Atelier Totori and Atelier Maru, they are going to continue with this, and they're going to, basically give you extra stuff along with the game.
Unfortunately, here in the glorious PAL land, even though games are multi-region for the PS3, the release in Europe and Australia was just the game, basically. Yeah, but just to give some quick thoughts on my experience with Atelier Rorona, I played it for about good 3 hours just to prepare for this podcast. And I must admit, the first hour I was ready to... like Shintai says, the game is very intimidating with the time management, but it also adds to the strategy of the game. Sort of, basically, you've got to plan beforehand how to use your time wisely. And I basically played the game for a bit more, and as I progressed, I kind of started to enjoy the game just a bit more. But there is a lot of reasons why you would be intimidated, like basically every time you move to a new area, that could be a day or two. Every time you make an item for alchemy, that could be a day or two. And like Shintai said, you have a certain amount of days before you need to develop these items for the castle. And each sort of assignment, they give you these certain amount of items that you need to create. But you also have basically some quests that the townspeople want you to do. So it's up to you how you use your time. But like I've said before, I really like the artwork. And as you heard before, I don't like the character of Astrid, which is a good sign. If a character straight into the game could make you feel that contempt, which is really good. And I think with a character who's lazy and vindictive, really goes off well with how innocent and ditzy Rorona is. I think it's a really good relationship in that fact. The one negative thing, I don't say it's negative, but the battle system isn't that flashy. It's very bare bones in terms of visuals. I mean, the visuals are very nice to look at, but there isn't some hyper mega death ray sort of attacks. Well, at least not at the start of the game. So it's very simplistic looking, very sort of slow paced. But so I did some investigating into basically Atelier Totori and Atelier Maruru, and those games look really stunning. The battle system and just the journeying graphics, especially some of Maruru's backdrops, just looks stunning. So how I treat Rorona is it's kind of their prototype. Kind of like, because it was their first game for the PS3, so they were just learning the ropes. And I have seen some improvement from the videos I've watched of the other two games, so it can be forgiven. But
it's also their first game that's in full 3D, because their other games prior to that have been in 2D sprites with 3D environments.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly true. So they had a lot to learn about because they wanted to adapt to so many different ways. So it can be completely understandable. Like Era said, the game is not for everyone. There is a certain cutesy twee factor that's sure to turn some people away. But if you can look past that, there's a lot of light-hearted humor to be had. Definitely, especially, I could foresee a lot of teenage anime fans really liking Atelier Rorona, and just sort of because there's a lot of one of the things I can just foresee is there's a lot of things you can relate to, like with the scenes with Rorona and Sturk. It just reminds me of so many crushes when you see in high school of people liking each other. So that kind of plays off well. To basically, in short, Rorona is a very time management heavy game where basically it's also a resource heavy game. Like you got to make sure that you use the time willingly to basically collect as much resources as you can, get as much gold as you can, because buying equipment takes money. Buying weaponry, to synthesize, and hiring characters. And this is one thing that a lot of people did not like, but it's something you have to adapt to in Atelier Rorona. Basically, better the character, the more he's going to cost per day. And this is actually something I didn't take well to first up. So it's something you got to be in the mindset to basically go through with. So if you want a game that's basically very complex with its management and you're ready for that, then you probably will want to give Atelier Rorona a go. I probably will continue it at another stage because it is very different than most RPGs that I'm playing right now. So definitely will pick it up at one stage. Ero, have you had any time with Atelier Rorona?
No, sadly I haven't been able to play any of the other games besides Khemia. It's something that I really want to do, but as with many RPG gamers, I have such a fantastic backlog of games, but I'll definitely get back to the Atelier series at one point, or check out the Artanelico series, from Gust. Anyways, I think it's about time to wrap up the podcast. The Atelier series is definitely a great series with a rich history, and I hope everybody, had a chance to delve into this series. For anybody interested, definitely check out the Atelier series official chronicle. You get a rundown on all the games, see the art, and experience it for yourself besides actually playing the games. Now everybody, please check out and support Gust as well as NIS America, because they are releasing fantastic games. In terms of the upcoming games, for the Gust, they haven't announced anything yet, but Tokyo Game Show is pretty soon, so who knows what they might announce. They've already said that they are going to be working on the next trilogy, so after Atelier Rorona, Totori and Mereru, they're going to stop the Garland series and move on to the next one. So that's pretty much it. I think we've discussed everything. We've been talking about the Salburg series, the Gramnad series, then we moved on to the Iris series, we've been talking about the Khemia series, the Garland series. We haven't really been talking about the spin-offs. Now there are quite a few spin-offs. There is Atelier Annie on the DS, which has been localized by NIS America as well. And then there are two other games on the DS, most notably Atelier Lisa that haven't been brought out besides Japan. There's also a Game Boy Advance game that I know about, but with this episode we really wanted to delve into the main series. You know, there are a lot of spin-offs with everything. Say we wanted to do an episode on Final Fantasy and then talking about all the spin-offs will really take on hours. So I hope everybody loved this look at the Atelier series. Once again, great talk, and this also marks the first experience for us bringing in a guest. So that was definitely Shintai123, one of my great friends here on YouTube. And he's, besides Shintai123, he also has an anime channel called the Anime Room. He does usually a lot of great co-op reviews, so definitely check out his channels if you want to. He is also on Mondo Coolcast, his own podcast on gaming, but I believe he is also on another website pretty recently. Please, Shintai, tell us all about it, and just talk about the other website that you're participating on.
And I'm on another website. It's called glitchedout.com. To anyone who's familiar with the Half-Blind Gamer, he is the one that is spearheading this website, and it's basically a website comprised of a bunch of video game reviewers, both for modern and retro games, a bunch of different people who do different game reviews for both, you know, modern and retro games. If you're interested, definitely check that out.
Well, again, thank you so much for being on this episode.
No problem.
Thank you always to my partner in crime, Arrow.
No problem. I very much like this episode.
Yeah, it's I'm glad we were able to finally talk about Atelier, because we had this idea for a long time. Actually, to be honest, I've actually talked about doing a Gust episode with Shintai a long time ago, before even Rpgibberish basically came in fruition. So it was very cool that we could finally do that. But for now, dear viewers, I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and see you next time.